Lord, please bless this meeting and all that are gathered here this evening. All of the decisions that we will be making tonight will be in the best interest of the citizens of Canby. All voices will be heard. In your name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first item on the agenda is citizen input on non-agenda items. Is there anybody here that would like to speak about something that is not on the agenda? I have Linda and Al Geddes. The subject of your testimony is groundwater and fill material. Is that still related? Where are you? Okay, is that still related to the? Okay, great. Okay, minutes from the last meeting, Laney? You're in here? Okay, so I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last planning commission meeting.
I'll motion to approve. I second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, is there any new business? Okay. We will now consider a request for a subdivision at 3500 North Maple Street consisting of 22 single-family home lots in the R1 low-density residential zone, SUB 17-05, the 7 acres spray. The matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please be prepared to step forward to the microphone at the appropriate time. State your name, mailing address, and interest in the matter. For those people other than the applicants that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please sign in on the sheet or speak up when we call for testimony or fill these little things out. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have a total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will be given 5 minutes each, the opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from hearing the present matter.
Mr. Chair, the Sprague family and I do go to the same church. I do plan to participate, but it won't have any bearing on any decision-making tonight.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time.
Chair, I have visited the site.
I have walked in the neighborhood, so there you have it. The public hearing will be conducted, excuse me. Does any member of the audience have any questions for any commissioner regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? Okay. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, we'll have the staff report, questions, if any, by the hearing body. Then I will open the public hearing for testimony. The applicant will have not more than 15 minutes. Proponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Opponents, not more than 5 minutes each. People that are neutral, not more than 5 minutes each. And then we will have rebuttal by the applicant, not more than 10 minutes each. I should point out that there's a lot of testimony. Normally, we're a little loosey-goosey on the time. Tonight, we will not be loosey-goosey on the time because everybody wants to go home and go to bed at a reasonable hour. I will close public testimony at that time. Questions, if any, by us. We'll have discussion and deliberation by the commissioners, and no additional testimony unless specifically allowed by the chair. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions about the procedure outlined for this hearing? Okay. Let's get on with it. Brian?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. The application before us today is a subdivision application. It's just a single application. You've been used to combination requests before you for various developments. This is a single application for a subdivision. And what we're reviewing is the preliminary or tentative plat that goes along with that request. They often call them site plans, but they're technically a tentative plat, a layout of the lots proposed on the subdivision. I kind of want to get through a couple administrative things first because I will forget if I don't do it right now. You had some items laid out on the dais in front of you as you came in today, and those included, and I'm going to kind of let you know what those are. There actually was a written testimony from Mr. Michael McNichols, and it is extensive. It's like 62 pages. And so that came in very late Friday. Both Laney and I were out of the office. So first thing this morning, we figured out how to save it in a smaller size, and we did email that to you late this morning. I don't know how many of you had a chance to look at that, but it is in front of you on the dais. And so I'm not going to be able to summarize 62 pages worth, so I wanted to let you know it's there. It is a letter basically with pointed out several individual aspects of the plan that they don't think is suitable and are in opposition. Then also in front of you is a request that came in sometime Friday from Arthur and Virginia Hall, and it's a one-page letter with 3 bullets on it. And just really quickly, they're not in favor of any parking restrictions on North Maple, so any aspect of the approval that would require approximately 9 homes not to be able to keep their parking, they think is totally unreasonable and shouldn't even be considered. The second matter has to do with the fact that existing at the north end of Maple Street, there is a cul-de-sac, a public large turnaround area, and she's opposed to that being vacated, even if the subdivision were developed all at once as proposed. She thinks it's inappropriate not to have a cul-de-sac at that location and would like to keep that in place. The third item she indicates is, believes it's a questionable drainage method that's proposed. She mentions, it appears, the use of dry wells, and I do not believe that's part of their current drainage plan, doesn't include dry wells. So I think that's about all I'll say about that. The other item that was submitted was from Mike Brown. It's a short email that I copied, and I believe I also sent that to you today. And he's opposed to mainly because of traffic issues. I think he's a little bit concerned because of all the pedestrians and bicycle use on the street as well, and just the fact that it's substandard and isn't really capable of taking the additional traffic that this subdivision would propose. Then there's two other items that I placed on the dais. One is a email from the applicant, Katie, that summarizes some information that was stated by our Public Works lead person that was responding to some neighborhood input, some fear that the sanitary sewer pump station might not have the capacity to handle this additional subdivision. And part of that, I think, came about because I don't know when it's occurred, but it was several years ago. There was a backup, maybe more than one, in one of the homes, maybe more than one, I don't know. And the pump station, a new pump station has been put in place since that time, and there hasn't been any trouble. And it was built to a capacity that would develop not only this development, but all the expected development that might utilize that pump station in the urban growth boundary area. So there shouldn't be that issue with this particular subdivision. And so I wanted you to know that was placed in the record, and it does indicate that statement from our Public Works lead related to that issue. And then the only other thing that was on the dais, which you've seen before, I just kind of wanted to remind you that there are 3 conditions of approval that staff had accidentally left out of our staff report. And so I wanted to remind you that those 3 conditions are before you and should be added if you make a motion for approval of this, so that we can have those included as well. I'm going to talk just really quickly because we have so many people that can provide various input. But it is 22 lots, and they're using a lot averaging in order to arrive at the design that they've done. And the only question that's with that lot averaging is that they have 4 lots that are larger than the 10,000 square foot maximum lot size that's allowed. So they are actually asking for an exception. We pointed out in the staff report that 2 of those lots are flag lots, which by definition have narrow access frontages to the front, to the public street. And that was one of the other issues that came up, is that they had several lots that weren't meeting the 60-foot minimum lot width along a public street. And we have on very regular basis approved subdivisions that all over town that do not meet at the cul-de-sacs, or in this case, you would probably consider the eyebrows, that it's impossible to meet that 60-foot standard, and there are several instances in the code where it gives the Planning Commission discretion if you find that there's adequate access to the lots being provided, that the 60-foot minimum frontage on a public street can be waived. And with the minimum lot size, they have one large lot, 22, at the very end, and you can see that on the drawing here at the very north end. By having one large lot, that was the reason that imposed the lot averaging, in order that they would have the overall average of the lot sizes within that 10,000 maximum or the 7,000 minimum. And they are asking for 2 of those lots, I believe, with the exception. And staff is fully supportive of the findings that the applicant submitted in their narrative as to why they think it's suitable to have those extra lots that are slightly larger than the 10,000-foot maximum. So I wanted to let you know that staff doesn't have any trouble at all supporting the findings that the applicant submitted for that. And we believe that the access on the public street for those flag lots and those that are around the eyebrow do not pose any access difficulties for those particular lots. They're very common. We've done those in a great variety of subdivisions around town. The one lady's question about the existing cul-de-sac on the end of Maple Street, I'd heard that from someone earlier, and it doesn't really ring very true to me that we would keep that, because they're now extending the street and they're extending it in a circular manner, and that is far better than a cul-de-sac itself. But of course, you have to get to the full development before you have this full circular street within the site that comes back out. In the meantime, there is a condition of approval that talks about meeting any fire emergency access requirement from our fire district on a turnaround available. And what they do with that is you can back up into the streets and the eyebrows themselves and be able to turn around in that manner, because the eyebrows are very much like a partial cul-de-sac, and you have the rest of the streets going out in 2 directions to back up, pull forward and back out as well. So we think they're going to be able to meet any turnaround requirements as they're phasing the development by using those street stubs and the eyebrows to do that. And we've made that a condition of approval, that they meet the fire standards. If for some reason they have difficulty with that, they may have to develop in, not follow the 6 phases, but develop more at one time in order to have the adequate turnarounds. Other things we've seen done is using a full lot for a turnaround as well, rather than, and we've got several cases where we've approved subdivisions where the turnaround is in the lot temporarily until the street keeps going, and then they remove that and they're able to get a building permit and build on that lot. It was only a temporary turnaround easement. So there are alternatives that they can use for meeting that. We have evidence in the file and record from our pre-application meeting with all the utility service companies, and the indication on the sewer pump station. We have a utility plan that was submitted here very recently with their latest submittals that came in about October 10th, that slightly changed the location of the detention facility in Tract B, and also proposed where the stormwater drainage line would be through the site, eventually heading through the logging road trail and then out to the outfall to the Willamette River. Their sanitary sewer plan is currently proposed to go up to the logging road trail and over to the sanitary sewer lift station that's just down the way. So they've complied with meeting all of the necessary infrastructure standards to serve the proposed subdivision. And we have yet, with the tremendous public input we've received, we haven't seen anything related specifically to the particular design of this subdivision or the infrastructure that's proposed at this point to support it, other than a few comments about and concern about drainage because of the long past history, knowledge, in 1966 that there was some flooding that actually affected this property. There's been changes structurally to the Willamette River upstream that supposedly have corrected that possibility of happening again. Of course, you never say never when you're dealing with rivers, et cetera, but anyway, this area is shown and has been shown to be out of the floodplain. Our ordinances allow you to build actually when you have a designated floodplain, if you follow the FEMA standards and what we have in our ordinance to do such. They don't have to do that because they're not in a designated floodplain, but official adopted Corps of Engineer firm maps. And the proposed drainage plan is a really robust drainage plan now. I'm happy to report because there was an agreement that was entered into between the city, the adjacent farm owners, the Monacucos, and the applicant that proposes a solution to a possible 100 or 500-year storm event that might occur, and having a large drainage line that would go through this particular 7-acre subdivision and out to the river that could help handle a situation like that. Of course, the applicant had an interest in that. The neighboring farmers had an interest in solving that issue. And the city is looking towards the future possibility of an urban growth boundary expansion and having to deal with additional development stormwater at that time. And we feel like the solution that was proposed in that agreement will help look to the future as well, which is a good thing because most of the farmland in the area through this particular property, as a lot of the neighbors were aware of that. And I think the drainage plan is well on its way. There'll be more analysis submitted at the construction stage, like there always is, to back up all of the proposed information and lines with the analysis that proves that, yes, it does, meet our standards and meets the extra effort that was made in that agreement to help satisfy adjacent property owners in that future look as well. So other than that, the subdivision itself seems to be fairly clear. There was a question raised about whether the developer proposed fencing on the outside edge. You've got the edge that's against the Monacuco farmland. You've got the other edge that's basically against the logging road trail. And at one point in the discussion, the developer did indicate that they felt like they might put a fence along the logging road trail and thought that was a good idea. And we bring that up because not that we require such a fence, but if one's planned, often it's good to know whether it's planned or not. And it also can help even the looks and aesthetics of a subdivision if a fencing is going to go in, to know at a time and possibly have the developer do that, because then you get a nice uniform look along the subdivision, and I think that can be an advantage. The issue seen along the farmland came up at an early pre-app in some subsequent meetings with the farm property people, that individual neighbors, and I know it is fairly common, not in our community, just in our community, but in many other cities where people will mow their grass and dump the grass clippings across the fence. Well, in this case, that's going to adversely impact the farm properties. Building a fence doesn't mean they won't still dump their clippings over the fence, though. So, but I think the thought was that it would be best that people that live in the homes don't freely roam out into the farmland because they could be damaging new crops that are coming up in the field. And so I just thought I would mention that's in terms of why fencing issue had come up. Generally, we are not in favor of walling off subdivisions from the community. This wouldn't really do that to any great degree because there wouldn't be a gated fence, so to speak. But fencing might have some bearing or be a desirable feature for this subdivision. Other than that, the bulk of the staff's effort, the applicant's effort, and the involvement of the public has been related to off-site improvements that are related to North Maple Street. We've established early on that the existing street that comes up to serve this subdivision is not built to a city standard. It was built to a half-city standard at the time in '73 that the subdivisions that are along it were platted. And I indicated in the staff report that I thought it was informative to know that at that time, no sidewalks were required in the city code. So there was no sidewalk built on the east side of North Maple. It's not a fault of anyone. No one thought sidewalks were important enough to even have a requirement for them in the city code at that time. The improvements on North Maple have been widely debated. We've have several traffic studies that are attached in your packet. One started back in April of 2015. I may get the year wrong now, whether it was 15 or 16, because we've been working on this subdivision for over 2 years. And I give credit to the applicant for his perseverance in looking at every possible angle of how improvements could be made to the street coming up to serve this subdivision, starting off with the limitation that there's only 30 foot of right-of-way for about 1,700 and some feet just north or just south of the subdivision. The drainage agreement that I spoke to before apparently has set in motion, and I'll let the applicant talk more about this, that they do have access to 10 foot of additional right-of-way adjacent to the Monacuco's property now, which is the one in tax lot 300 that's just south of their development. That gives them the ability, and actually is an agreement that they will widen that portion of the street to 34 feet in width. And I'm going to let the applicant talk about that a little bit more, because one of the other submittals we have is this packet here that just got passed around to you. And this is new information. I haven't seen this yet. I just glanced at it before the meeting started. And it does indicate that 34 feet along the Monacuco's property in width. And there's another piece of information that I saw an early draft of late today at the office. This one here has some data that supports it as well. And this is a additional traffic kind of analysis based upon the pedestrian traffic and how the applicant may be proposing to deal with pedestrian safety. And so I wanted you to know that was there, and I think the applicant will speak further to that. I'm not going to say too much more about the off-site improvements. There is, and you need to be aware of, that all of the off-site improvements from pretty much day one, because the applicant has gone so far towards trying to make improvements that, and has submitted information in for the record about their proportional share of improvements. And they basically have gone beyond what we would consider a normal proportional share in what they're proposing to make. And so we did not do any detailed analysis of that, but the applicant has provided some information along with the record of what they feel like their proportional share would actually be. And as far as I can tell, they're exceeding that in what they're proposing to do in terms of widening the street and providing for increased vehicular and safety traffic. Since their proposed plan for widening may actually change some from what was indicated in the staff report, I'm going to let them address that issue tonight. In terms of a recommendation, with all the information that staff knows right now, we still support the approval of this development. As I've mentioned, we think that the subdivision itself meets all ordinance standards. With your approval of the exception to have 2 lots over 10,000 square feet in size, than would normally be allowed, which is only 1 over the 10% of their lots. And the issue then kind of relates to, are they making a proportional share of improvements off of the site? We believe they definitely are, and more so. And are they required, should they be required to improve all the deficiency that exists on the street that leads? And in the record that we provided the various ordinance provisions that are related to street standards and such. And staff still believes that it could be interpreted in a possible way that most of the standards that we have in our code talk about the subdivision itself. None of them are absolutely clear of what the standard should be coming up to a subdivision to serve it. Most of the standards seem to talk about what the street should be inside of your subdivision. One ordinance provision that does clearly tell you what the minimum standard should be, because it states it, that any road leading up to a subdivision shall be a minimum of 24 feet in width. That's the only standard that I can see clearly tells us what the street width should be. And that's relevant because we have a lot of substandard streets around town. And we've approved subdivisions where that street that it goes out on at some point goes into another street, and either one or both of those streets are not meeting full width standards. Most of those streets are county roads. They're in the city. And so we would have difficulty having approved several subdivisions in the past if we use a 34-foot standard street width, which is the local street that North Maple is, as the undisputed level coming in to meet any proposed subdivision that has the proper zoning and has a right to develop their property. So those are about the only things that I want to do, and I'm here to answer any questions you have at this time, or once you take public input. If you need some more input from me at that time, happy to help.
Any questions for Brian this time?
Is there going to be access on the back of those properties that border the Willamette River?
Could you speak up a little, please?
Is there going to be access to those, from those properties that border the Willamette River down into that green space down in there?
Are you talking out towards the logging road trail?
Yeah,
I mean,
kind of north or.
There is an emergency access halfway between the lots that is to serve both a means of pedestrian connection and bicycle connection to flow from the logging road trail through the subdivision so they can come out to North Maple. Otherwise, they can come out onto the streets within this design to make the circular loop pattern that the neighbors say that people are using when they're walking and biking on the logging road trail. If that's the type of access, there is that connection there.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Brian at this time? Okay, let's hear from the proponent. You'll have 15 minutes, Lainey. You'll keep track of that for us. Please state your name and address.
Mr. Chair, I'm Doug Sprague, the applicant, along with my wife, Lori. This is our attorney, Mike Robinson. I'd like to have him speak for a moment.
Thanks, Doug. Good evening, Chair Savory, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Mike Robinson. I'm a land use attorney. My mailing address is 1120 Northwest Cooch, spelled C-O-U-C-H Street, 10th floor, Portland, 97209-4128. So I'm first of four folks that are going to talk tonight. In addition to Doug, we have Todd Mobley, who is the traffic engineer. Todd prepared the additional analysis that was presented to you tonight. And Katie Galt, Doug's daughter, she's going to come up after I finish talking and talk to you more about how they propose to take care of Maple Street. So I don't want to take a lot of time, but what I do want to do is touch on three things. First thing I want to touch on is what our job is tonight. It's to give you the evidence that allow you to find that we meet the applicable approval criteria. We agree with the staff report and the recommended conditions of approval, including the additional conditions of approval that Brian talked about. Secondly, I want to touch on really four issues. There are a number of issues raised by testimony to the Planning Commission, but these are four issues that were repeatedly raised, so I thought it might be worth touching bases on them, and then we can talk about them in more detail if you like. First is traffic. You actually have three memoranda in front of you, two from the city traffic engineer, DKS, and one from our traffic engineer, Lancaster Engineering. What all three of those documents have in common is they all conclude with the improvements that the applicant is proposing, both widening of the street and the creation of a walkway off the street, that the street will function as it is intended to function, and you will have adequate pedestrian access. Second issue that was raised more than once was whether there would be secondary or emergency access to the subdivision. As Brian already said, if you look at the site plan that's before you, Track C is both a pedestrian and bicycle access and emergency access to the logging road. The third issue is Maple Street. Katie's going to talk about that in more detail, but what the applicant is proposing in the way of improvements for Maple Street satisfy the code standards in Canby Municipal Code, Chapter 1646. And the fourth issue is drainage. We have to meet city drainage standards when we construct the subdivision. Brian's already mentioned the stormwater agreement that we entered into with both the city and Monacuco Farms. And there's also condition of approval 20 recommended by staff, which requires us to provide stormwater meeting city public works standards. So the last thing I want to say is we understand a lot of folks are opposed to this. They don't want to see it happen. But what matters is whether we've submitted evidence demonstrating that the approval criteria are satisfied. I think the new thing that folks heard tonight, and that probably you heard for the first time, is that the applicant intends to fully improve Maple Street to a code standard in 1646. And that is what the code requires, and it's feasible to do that, and we propose to do it. So having said all that, Chair Savory, I'll stop talking. We hope at the end of your hearing that you'll agree with us that we met the approval criteria and that you'll approve the application. But I'm going to turn it over to Todd Mobley to talk about traffic, and then Katie will come up. Thank you.
Please state your name and address.
Good evening, I'm Todd Mobley with Lancaster Engineering. My address is 321 Southwest 4th Avenue, Suite 400 in Portland, 97204. I'll be brief as well. We've had, as Brian mentioned, sort of years of background here in looking at Maple Street and the configuration and traffic volumes and pedestrian safety. But what I submitted today that's in front of you there is a quick summary about traffic volume data and pedestrian safety. We went ahead and did another set of traffic counts. It had been a little time since the prior ones. Our numbers showed pretty similar volumes. We counted two locations, one just north of the golf club access that's about 500 vehicles per day, and another kind of at the south boundary of the Monacuco property on tax lot 300, which was only 223 vehicles per day. So we provide a little context here about ADTs and traffic volumes, ADTs, average daily traffic, how many cars go by over a 24-hour period. And they always sound larger than they really are because they're usually in the hundreds or sometimes the thousands. So in this case, about the middle of that stretch of Maple, the southern boundary of tax lot 300, there were 223 vehicles in a day. In the peak 1 hour period, the busiest hour of the day, there were only 8 vehicles southbound and 15 vehicles northbound. So to put some context to that, 8 vehicles in 1 hour is only 1 car arriving every 7.5 minutes. So you could wait 7.5 minutes and 1 car would go by. In the other direction, which is 15, that's every 4 minutes. So these are real low volume. It's kind of sleepy in terms of passing cars, and so I wanted to make sure we added some context to that. And narrower streets like Maple is now particularly can usually accommodate 1 vehicle in each direction pretty easily without feeling like you're crowded, especially for pedestrians or other users on the street. And with these kind of traffic volumes, we found that at least in the middle section there, 2 cars would meet like less than 2 times during the peak hour, just with some probability based on those traffic volumes. So really, when 2 vehicles meet, that happens even during the busiest hour of the day, on average, less than twice. So what we're talking about here is really kind of a quiet, low-volume situation. With regard to pedestrian safety, we provided some material from the Small Town and Rural Design Guide, which is a publication from FHWA that talks about a pedestrian path as an interim or temporary facility to be used on roads with low and moderate speeds and volumes. The data in the record shows that this is in fact a road with low to moderate speeds and volumes. We just wanted to show this is an appropriate configuration. It doesn't fit neatly into the city's design standard for a local street. So we wanted to provide some more evidence to show that with this neighborhood, it's a safe accommodation for pedestrians. So I'm happy to answer questions maybe at the end, and I'll be available for rebuttal as well. But
Anybody have any questions? I do. With 22, was it 22 houses that you're planning on putting in there, is that correct? Does that really seem reasonable that, say, you know, when people are going off to work, there are only going to be 2 people out of 22 houses that are going to be going on the road? Does that seem reasonable? I mean, it doesn't to me, but I don't know what your methodology is for arriving at 2 cars, double it to 4, I don't care, but 22 people, 22 households going to and from work, and you're only going to see 2 cars on the road?
well, there's a number of ways that's been examined in the prior traffic studies, but really the most direct comparison is there's 71 homes north of the golf club access on Maple. Those 71 homes generate about 500 vehicles per day, which is on average 7 to 7.5 trips per dwelling unit. And a trip, if you run to the grocery store, that's 2 trips, 1 in and 1 out. So that existing neighborhood, that's very similar to the proposed neighborhood, generates about 7 to 7.5 vehicle trips per day per home. So that's the real basis of how we look at the traffic impact from the subdivision.
So, Mr. Chairman, I am not only the applicant, I'm a neighbor. I've lived in this neighborhood for 27 years. Very concerned about the traffic and the concerns and trying to wrap my head around what this will really do. So I sat there for an hour in peak traffic last Monday, and I saw 2 cars pass one time and 2 times between 7 and 8 a.m. So the probability, you know, held true with what I observed. I made multiple trips down the street watching for when cars pass. Because of the public input and the amount of people that are concerned about it, it can seem like it's way bigger issue than it really is in terms of that passage. So that's what I observed sitting there literally to try to get a feel for myself, because these traffic numbers don't mean anything to me. So that was my observation.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
So in the interest of time, I'll quickly introduce my daughter, but basically my wife and I have been owners of the property for the last 4 or 5 years, but it's been a piece in our family since 1977. We have great concern for our community, for the neighbors, and have put a lot of effort into addressing all the concerns. I think even the road widths and the traffic impact we have addressed, and I'll let Katie talk to you about the change that we've made. We had right-of-way concerns that have been solved, and so we are going to propose to widen that street. We have 2 options. I'll let her explain.
State your name and address, please.
Evening, Chair Savory. I'm Katie Galt, 2057 North Lapine Street, Canby. Lainey or Brian, if you could go to the 4th slide for us.
This one here?
Yes. Initially, the city's traffic engineer, DKS and Associates, recommended that we pay a proportional share of a sidewalk to be located within the existing right-of-way behind the existing curb on the east side of Maple Street, and recommended the removal of parking on Maple Street from approximately the country club to our site. That proportional share was calculated to be approximately $91,000. After discussions with city staff, it was clear that this sidewalk improvement was not a priority for the city, and the city had no desire to fund the balance of the project to construct it in the future with city funds. Additionally, the city and the fire marshal had no interest in removing parking on this stretch of the road to correct the deficiency that exists today, even without the subdivision, since all evidence suggests that this stretch of road is very safe. As we listened to our neighbors' concerns, it was clear they did not want to have a sidewalk installed in the existing right-of-way on the east side of Maple that they currently use as their front yards, as DKS proposed, especially if they would be required to contribute to the cost by a local improvement district formation. The proposed removal of parking was also a burden for them. And I'd like to clarify, in our current proposal, we're not proposing any sidewalk improvements on the east side of Maple, and we're not in any way asking the owners on the east side of Maple to contribute financially to any improvements we're proposing. We're not suggesting any LIDs be formed to fund anything on the east side of Maple. And we're also no longer requesting the removal of any existing parking on Maple Street. If you could go to the next slide, please, Brian. In our amended proposal on October 10th to the city, for the area south, how about the next one? For the area south of tax lot 300. So the area in blue that you see is the frontage of tax lot 300. So what I'll speak to first is our proposal for the area in red, the area south of tax lot 300, that goes all the way to the existing sidewalk that is on the west side of Maple. So in our amended proposal on October 10th, we offered a full 34-foot widening in this area, the red area, and stated we were willing to volunteer this option at the city's request. Our intent was that we were only volunteering it in case Planning Commission felt it was a burden that this subdivision should bear. However, since staff recommended the 34-foot option as a condition of approval rather than all of the options we proposed in that memo, that drove us to further consider the 34-foot option. And we believe after further review that the 34-foot widening option in this area is not the best option for the neighborhood. We'd like to offer a slightly revised solution that we believe would enhance the pedestrian safety and preserve the rural feel of the neighborhood. South of tax lot 300 to the existing sidewalk termination on the west side of Maple, we're proposing to widen the street to 28 feet to allow the parking to remain. And that's the section AA that you see on the bottom. We also propose to add a 5-foot walk path that is separated by about 6 feet from the travel lanes. That walk path would be located on the west side of the street. In this new proposed scenario, parking would be retained and pedestrian safety would be enhanced. And so we'd ask, there's a condition of approval 9A that recommends a 34-foot widening here, and we would ask that you give us the option to either widen to 34 feet or improve to this section AA as we've proposed. We believe that both meet the intent of the code, and it's something that could be worked out with city staff at the time of engineering plan approval, since they both are compliant with the code. For the frontage of tax lot 300, we have signed a memorandum of understanding with the property owner, Monacuco Farms, to acquire right-of-way to widen the street to 34 feet. This 34-foot widening, the area showed in blue, would allow parking to remain and would provide a 4-foot pedestrian lane on the west side of the street. Next slide, please. At an estimated value of $236,000 for the improvements that we're proposing, these proposed improvements not only allow existing deficiencies to be corrected, but go well above and beyond the proportional share recommended by the city's traffic engineer, estimated to be $91,000, so approximately 2.5 times what they deemed as our proportional share. A couple other things unrelated to Maple Street, or actually just one other item. The concern that was brought up about the temporary cul-de-sac being vacated at the north end of Maple. The Country Club Estates Annex Number 3 plat, the plat that's in the county records, actually has a note on it that says the temporary cul-de-sac to be vacated commencing at the northwest corner of our lot in the event of future street extension. So it was contemplated at the time of that development in the 70s that that cul-de-sac would be vacated. So I can give Brian a copy of that if you'd like as well. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Do we have any questions at this time?
Just to ask a question for clarification. So you're saying that the cost associated with widening the street and adding the walking path and sidewalk would be 100% covered by your development, not by the neighbors in the neighborhood?
That is correct.
Okay.
And there would be no parking for the neighbors that's lost, right?
No parking lost. All of the existing parking would remain.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Chair, the two options that are before you, it's important to me to be able to use either of those options, because at widening 34 feet, I believe that the traffic will move faster through there. I'd like to look at the option of keeping that at the 28 feet and using that separate path. So those two options are important to be able to consider. So.
But under either option, no parking is lost, is that correct?
That's correct.
And there is no sidewalk cost to the neighbors? Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Garrett Stevenson? Please state your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Garrett Stevenson. My address is 1211 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland, Oregon 97204. I'm going to be very brief. I'm here representing Monacuco Rentals, which is actually the company that rents farmland to Monacuco Farms. And of course, as you've heard, Monacuco Rentals owns the property, which has been kind of called Tax Lot 300, but generally adjacent to the blue line to the north there. We're here to recommend that you approve the application tonight. We think it's a good application and solves a lot of tricky problems with some of the existing public facilities out there. But I also wanted to confirm and clarify our involvement. You've heard of some agreements that we've had with the city as well as with Canby Development. And everything you've heard is accurate. What Monacuco is prepared to do under these agreements is dedicate additional right-of-way to equal a 34-foot paved improvement. And that's going to be along, if you can imagine, at the west side of Maple Street. And, you know, specifically, there's a couple things that we were looking for in terms of what that right-of-way was going to look like in the near future. Bear in mind that this area is how Monacuco actually accesses some of its farmland when it's using Maple Street. So one of the requests we have for the specific improvement along that section, and bear in mind this is along the west side, not the east side. So there's been a lot of parking concerns about lost parking primarily on the east side. We're more concerned about the creation of additional parking on the west side. So we're going to ask that as part of this improvement that there is no parking along that west side so they can continue to get in and out of their farmland. In addition to that, we believe what is going to work really well here as part of the improvement is an at-grade pedestrian and shared bike path. For the same reason, obviously curbs would cause a lot of problems for farm vehicles getting in and out of there. And essentially, in return for that, what the city and Canby Development has agreed to do is provide an upsized storm drainage main that would continue to allow Monacuco Farms to drain through that main out to the outfall to the Willamette River. It currently does that. There's a 12-inch main that's been serving Monacuco for, I think, almost 40 years now. So that's going to be replaced with a greatly upsized line. The benefits to that are a couple. Number one, it's going to be sized to handle the stormwater from the development, but also be in place so that if some point in the future some of the farmland does develop for housing, as staff indicated, there's a possibility at some point in the future this might come into the UGB. So the thought was get the infrastructure in now to the degree possible so that it can serve that going forward. The additional capacity is going to be available to, of course, the development itself, but also during a flood event to Monacuco Farms. During a non-flood event, that will still be restricted to the volume consistent with a 12-inch line. So at the end of the day, you know, this project, I think, comes up with a lot of unique and thoughtful solutions to the problem of adapting this street to future development and to also make it safer. I did want to make one last note. There was some discussion of the fencing. That's actually very truly important to Monacuco. There's a lot of crops that are going to be continuing to grow right up against the back of this development, so we encourage you to support that requirement. But other than that, we hope you will approve the development, and I'm available to ask any questions you might have about the agreements with the city and with Canby Development.
Any questions? I have a question.
Sure.
You said that you're requesting that there is no parking allowed on the west side of Maple, is that correct?
That's right.
Is there currently parking allowed on the west side of Maple?
No.
Apparently there's not.
So, hopefully that will not be too big of an ask.
Apparently not. With all the farm equipment going up and down Maple, how will that affect the two cars that are supposed to be passing each other?
Well, Well, my understanding, Chair Savor,
Is that part of the traffic study was farm equipment on the road?
well, frankly, you're asking the wrong guy, but I will say this. The development's not going to increase the number of farm vehicles already using that street. The main goal of requesting no parking is to reduce the impacts of the change on the Montecouco.
Well, I didn't think that there would be increased farm vehicle traffic on the road. I'm just saying, would it interfere with the increased traffic coming out of the development to begin with?
Well, I certainly haven't heard that concern from my client, but I would refer to Todd Mobley behind me to answer any questions you might have on whether that's realistic in terms of a traffic analysis or not.
What kind of farm equipment will be going up and down the road?
Well, my understanding from having been out to the site is, to a large extent, probably pickup trucks. But
Apparently, there's a disagreement, but, so I guess I'm,
I suppose we could get you that answer, but
because when I think of farm equipment, I think of things that you put, you know, large amounts of, I'm familiar with what the Montecoucos grow because I abut part of their property over further on down the road. So I would be concerned that it's not just, you know, little F-150s, but more likely something that's going to hold a lot of, I don't know, broccoli or cabbage or something, I don't know. Something that's harvested.
well, Mr. Chair, maybe I can hand it over to somebody who does know the answer to your question.
Okay. If you'll state your name and.
Ed Montecouco, 3468 North Holly. I'm a retired partner. I do not have any, what do you call it, ties to Montecouco Farms anymore. I'm a member of Montecouco Rentals. As far as traffic, most of our equipment comes in from Locust Street and down by the ferry. Okay, now there is pickups that go back and forth there. They're mostly for irrigation. Now, there is some traffic as far as tractors going in and out. When it's, what would you say, when it's convenient for them. Now, there is some, for harvesting too, there's tractors going into the field, coming down Maple Street, somewhat. There's buses that haul the crew to and from the fields. Sometimes it makes it easier to get to the other end of the farm on Maple Street. As far as high impact, I don't know what you call high impact as far as what equipment is going up and down that street. But most of it does come from Locust and 37th Street. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Are there any other proponents that would like to speak at this time? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address, please.
Will Snyder, 626 Northwest Territorial Road. My name is Will Snyder. I'm a Canby resident, a real estate appraiser, and home builder. I believe Canby, specifically North Canby, is in need of buildable lots. As an appraiser, I've seen near record-setting appreciation since 2012 throughout the Portland metro area. This includes Canby. Unlike the 2005 to 2007 appreciation period that popped, the value increases over the last 4 to 5 years are due to unprecedented population increase, not high-risk loans found in 2005 to 2007. The Portland metro area is now nationally recognized as leaders in green, IT, and marketing jobs, as well as being home to world-renowned chefs and restaurants, microbreweries, and wineries. In addition to being leaders in outdoor activities from the Oregon coast to the Cascade Mountains. To put simply, an executive making $250,000 a year in San Francisco can move to Portland, get the same job, make the same amount of money, but cut their drive time in half and at half the cost of living expenses, plus have a wider exposure to outdoor activities, being less than 1.5 hours from the coast or Cascades. A $1.2 million home that they owned in San Francisco is now a $700,000 home here. For 3 straight years, Oregon has had more new residents than any other state in the country. This massive and unprecedented influx of employable and active people has gobbled up our real estate, which has led to a well-documented land shortage over the last 2 to 3 years. This land shortage has limited construction, which limited supply, which has caused record-setting market appreciation. A couple of good examples of limited supply can be seen in the last 3 subdivisions in North Canby: Pine Meadows, Fran Meadows, and Northwood Estates. Combined, Pine and Fran's Meadows had 37 lots. Sold prices for these homes ranged from $398,000 to $495,000, with the median being in the $460,000 range. Most of those properties sold before they were even listed. Northwood Estates just released Phase 3, which contained 21 lots. They all sold in one day. There was 5 additional buyers who wanted to buy, but they couldn't because they were all sold out. Sale prices for these homes will start around $485,000 and will likely go well into the $600,000 range. One key factor to also be aware of regarding Northwood Estates is that CC&Rs require a very high standard of construction and don't allow a previously built floor plan to be built a second time. These requirements create a very appealing and highly valued development, which is why I believe the lot sold out in one day. As a custom home builder, my #1 clients are baby boomers that have recently retired or are about to retire. They want to downsize from their large 2-bedroom, 2-story family homes to a 1-level home around 2,000 square feet. However, a typical lot size needed to build a 2,000 square foot home with a 3-car garage is around 7,500 to 8,000 square feet. Lots of this size are becoming increasingly rare to find, especially as you travel further north in the Portland metro area. So these baby boomers, the largest generation, are scrambling to find large enough lots for their retirement plans. To date, I've built homes for people from West Lynn, Lake Oswego, Beaverton, Tualatin, Oregon City, Wilsonville, Milwaukee. When I asked them why Canby, the answer was generally the same, because Canby was the only market that provided them the quality of lifestyle they wanted with the lots big enough for the home that they needed. I strongly believe that there is a need for lots large enough for single-level homes in a small, quiet yet upscale development, and the 7-acre subdivision would be a perfect fit for that.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more proponents? Okay, we'll scamper along to the, oh, I'm sorry. Didn't see you there. Please state your name and address.
Joel Sprague, 436 Northwest Territorial Avenue, Canby, Oregon. I'm here to read a couple letters I have here tonight from other proponents that couldn't attend. This one states, Dear Canby Planning Commission, my wife Sarah and I both live in Canby area our entire lives, attended Canby schools, now are raising our 3 children in the community. The land at the end of Maple Street has always been so appealing to us as a place to raise our family. Beautiful scenery, low traffic, so the kids can ride bikes, access the logging trail, and for morning runs and evening walks. Given the opportunity, we believe that it's the best land in town to build a house and continue to raise our 6, 8, and 11-year-old children. We consider this property to be an ideal area to expand Canby's appeal and beauty. Warm regards, the Swore family. This is the second letter I have. Canby has been my home for nearly 80 years. I am writing this to the Canby Planning Commission as a proponent for the appeal of subdivision 17-05. The application submitted by the Canby Development Company. The 7 acres property has been under my family ownership since 1977. It was originally purchased by my parents along with my husband and I, in good faith that one day this land could be developed. Provided home for lots for sale in the Canby area. My parents' death left us the sole owners. My husband and I, Elroy Knutson, had dreams to develop this property into a pretty subdivision that would make Canby proud. Sadly, he is in memory care now, and he will never realize that dream. It has become necessary to sell the property once he went into full-time care. So our son and daughter-in-law, Doug and Lori Sprague, purchased acreage and have picked up that dream, hoping to fulfill it. They have maintained the property well, implemented many improvements, and kept it mowed to provide safe and pleasant environment for the neighborhood. In the mid-1990s, the site was approved for a development by the city, only to be overruled due to pressure from objecting neighbors. Now, many years later, Doug and Lori have gone through the very costly process of getting the land to the point of approval for the Canby Planning Commission. They have complied with many requirements. In fact, they have been very amenable to the special requests and needs of the neighbors that object to the development. While I agree with the support and the staff recommendation to approve the application, I am not in agreement with the burden of this recommendation that has been placed on the application. The burden for the street improvement is far beyond the impact this development brings to the neighborhood. Currently, North Maplewood Street is not to code, nor has the safety of the street been a priority of the city felt a need to address. The impact of the 23 homes will bring to the community far less than the impact of the 70-plus homes that have existed there for the last 40 years. The city has no obligation to preserve private property for the enjoyment of the community. I believe the objections of the adjoining neighbors should not be a swaying factor in the approval decision. When the developer has complied with the municipal requirements and concerns. There's a shortage for available lots on the north side of Canby, and the street improvements would provide more safety for pedestrians. The end goal of this developer is to create a neighborhood that our community can be proud of, a place that our family can call home. Taking into all that into consideration, I believe the Planning Commission has an obligation and no alternative but to stamp this application approved. I also believe that this property is the only tract in Canby that has waited so many years to be approved by this development. Now is the time. I encourage you to say yes to this, and I thank you. Beverly Knutson, 597 Northeast 22nd Avenue, Canby, Oregon.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
On my behalf, Mr. Commissioner, like I said, I live at 436 Northwest Territorial, back up to hundreds of acres of IFA tree farms. And when I bought that property with my wife, knowing full well that someday that will too be developed, maybe in my lifetime, maybe not, it's part of what I see as change and necessary change. And I enjoy the farm tractors that cruise down my street, and I have to pull over to the side. And the costs are astounding looking at what they're having to do to widen that road. And I would just suggest that everyone take into consideration what they're giving up by getting a wider road at the corner of Northwest Territorial and North Birch. We recently did a street widening improvement, which improved traffic flow. It was really exciting. That's always been a tough corner to get around. And dark mornings, it's dangerous. It's a great improvement. I support it. It brings a lot more traffic, and it gets the cars moving faster down my street. And I'm not trying to be in opposition to that, but just saying the wider the street, the faster the traffic flow, and it takes away from part of that Canby pride that I love and I support. Thank you.
Any questions once again? Okay, thank you. Any more proponents that I might have overlooked? Don't want to overlook anybody. Okay. So, we'll move to opponents. Our first one is Joyce Ayers. Is that correct? Okay, Joyce. If you will please state your name and address.
My name is Joyce Ayers, 1920 North Country Club Drive, Canby. And by the address, you'll see that I don't live on Maple. I do sometimes walk on Maple. I do sometimes drive on Maple. When I walk on Maple, there's no sidewalks. When I walk on Country Club Drive, I usually walk on the street because there's sidewalks, and then there's no sidewalks. And then there's a sidewalk, and then there's no sidewalks. Some of the lots on our street have sidewalks, some do not. Most of them aren't taken care of. A lot of them are crumbling. When I read the information online last week, I was feeling for the neighbors who are on Maple Street who are currently using the street to park on. I've parked on the street up there when I go to visit my friends on the upper end of Maple Street. When I read in the report that the suggestion was that there's no parking on the east side of the street, that there's a sidewalk to be put in, and a local improvement district that the neighbors are going to participate in paying, I was outraged. I thought it was ridiculous. I was heartened this evening to hear the developer of the property saying that they don't want to have that happen. And I'm hopeful that it doesn't, because I think that the city still needs to have respect for the neighbors who have been there for years. I'm not here to talk either way about the development going in or not, but I am concerned about what happens with the development of Maple Street, and as it was noted just a few moments ago, the widening of a street does have a tendency to increase the speed at which people go from one end to the other. And that's the extent of my comments. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Al Geddes, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Correct.
Please state your name and address.
Al Geddes, I live at 740 Northeast 34th Place, Canby. There are a lot of things that have been said tonight, and I could spend a lot of time. I'd like to give part of my time to John Gunther when I get through. The thing that bothered me the most was the fill that went into that place, the supposedly development. In walking, it's in my backyard actually, in walking out my back door, down the steps and out the gate, most of the fill that I saw and I know not much about fill, was substandard. It was a lot of logging cables. At one time, by the tree on the north end of the lot, there was a pickup body, a car body. It was there one day. The next day in front of it, there was a hole about the size of a swimming pool hole. And the next day, the hole was filled up and there was no cars. So those things bother me, in that when the water came in, like, I think it was like 94, our backyard was flooded. So the drainage will be affected just because of the fill that was put in there. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you. Linda Geddes. Please state your name and address.
40 Northeast 34th Place. I just wanted to talk about the drainage and how the fill in this development has affected our home. The fill was allowed to be approximately 4 feet higher than our backyard. And at one time, we had 3 feet of water in our crawl space. We have a large crawl space, you can stand up in it. So 3 feet didn't come up and over into the house, but 3 feet was alarming, and we had to have a hardwired sump pump put in that still activates in rainy weather today. So it tells me that the drainage in the property is substandard, and I would hope that the advancements that they're gonna have in drainage is actually down in writing and not just a promise. Because we're not the only family that's been affected. There's other families on our street that have to have sump pumps too. So I thought there was a city code that said, for new development, first of all, do no harm to your neighbors. And I'd like for that to be true. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Doug Popper. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, Chair and Planning Commission members. I'm Doug Poppin with an N on the end.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. My mother's name is Mary Poppin, so.
Chim Chim Cheree.
And she would win any election that
Yeah.
she ever ran for. Who wouldn't vote for Mary Poppins, right?
Who wouldn't?
Anyway, I'm Doug Poppin. I'm a third resident of 3220 North Maple Street, Canby, and I'm speaking in opposition of the application. You will hear tonight, and I think you've already heard some of it, but there is going to be at least 6 major issues that people are having to deny the application. You may get as many as 10. You'll hear about road width, you'll hear about pedestrian and traffic safety, water runoff, fills, cul-de-sac codes, the inadequacy of the logging road to serve as an emergency access alternative, and parking. But on top of that, there are so many exceptions and so many uses of discretion, and even some creation of things that are outside of any of the provisions in the Canby Municipal Code. I had the opportunity today to just go through some of the reports and the application and look at the exceptions that are being made, all geared toward approval of the applicant. The first one you heard earlier from the planning director about lot size. The developer is limited to just 2 10,000 square feet lot sizes. He wants an exception to go to 4. Apparently, there's a clause in there that serves as a public benefit. I'm a member of the public. I certainly don't feel any public benefit for that. The planning director also talked about the lot width and the frontage standard. Again, there's 6 lots that don't conform to the standards with that lot width. And it results in access to the buildings, and it also results in limited parking, on-site parking. But they want you to make another exception to that. The third one is the National Fire Code requires 20 feet of clear paved access for fire vehicles. The logging road has 10 feet of width to it, and they want to make that as a alternative vehicle access for emergency vehicles. The fire marshal is also recommending that North Maple Street have an 18-foot clear, unobstructed width to it. So the standard is 20 feet, but both on the logging road and on North Maple Street, he's recommending that we go below that standard. Let's make another exception. He also has talked about requiring that the homes in that development have sprinklers, home sprinklers. There's no provisions in the Canby Municipal Code for requiring sprinklers to those homes. The next one is the developer wants to put in a 4-foot strip of asphalt to be used as a walking path or maybe for bicyclists. There's, again, no provisions in the code for a walking path. There is provisions for sidewalks, very clear regulations for sidewalks, but not a walkway, a 4-foot asphalt walkway. The other one is that when I read this report, it is clear here that sidewalks are clearly required and provided in the design of the proposed subdivision and for streets adjacent to that subdivision. So the key operative word there is adjacent. So I looked it up in the dictionary this morning just to see how that's defined. And it is defined very simply. There are 2 definitions for it. One is that it is lying near, close, adjoining, or neighboring. Well, that's exactly what North Maple Street is to that development. It's near, it's close, and it's adjoining. The second definition for adjacent is just before or just after or facing. Again, that's exactly what North Maple Street is to that development. So it's beyond me to say that sidewalks should be required in the code, but they're not being required. So in summary, when you think of the many, many major concerns that the neighborhood is having, the neighbors are having against this proposal, look at all the exceptions, all the uses of discretion, and all the creations that are outside the purview of the code, all in order to approve the applicant's proposal. To me, it seems excessive. Why not follow the code? If the code needs to be changed, then change the code. It just seems to me that the exceptions are becoming the rules. I want to finish with this parking issue, the elimination of the parking. And I heard tonight, just like you all did, that there is now the securing of the Monte Coco property to build a 34-foot road all the way down from 23rd all the way into the subdivision. And with that, then parking would not be eliminated on Maple Street, North Maple Street. And I have heard that that's all in a memorandum of understanding. Well, it is my respectful recommendation to you that that clearly be articulated in a condition, that this condition must be met to secure the property, to make sure that there's a 30-foot road and that parking will not be eliminated in very legal, binding, and irrevocable terms. Because this whole application process has changed at least 3 times in the last 12 months. And I'm fearful that it'll be changed again. Something might come up where that isn't actually going to happen, and all of a sudden we're facing 8 or 9 of our homes with no parking. And if you put yourself in our spot about the hardships that that create, you know, there's Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, family gatherings. People, we have Thanksgiving every year. We have up to 26 people every year having Thanksgiving at our house. And parking, the people are parking on the streets. Where would they park their cars if parking wasn't allowed? So I want to just be very, very careful and assured that you stand up and say, we will not allow the application to be approved if there is no parking on North Maple Street. I thank you for listening to me, and I do thank you for serving on the Planning Commission.
Any questions? Nikki Poppin.
I took her spot.
Oh, you did?
She wrote the speech. But
Oh. and good for her. Excellent. Let's see, I have a Philip Seal. Please state your name and address, please.
Feels good to sit down. Philip Seal, 3240 North Maple. I'm going to just address one issue that Doug talked about briefly, and it's this access for emergency vehicles. If you, and I'm sure you've read the staff report, we have to have 18 feet of free pavement for emergency vehicles on North Maple Street, according to the fire marshal. According to the city code of ordinances, there also has to be an alternative, a legally binding alternative emergency route for vehicles. The applicant, and I think the city staff, says that a 10-foot wide walking path for bicycles and joggers and walkers is the same, is equivalent. It's a legal alternative. And it's a mile long from where the entrance to that path is. Now, how can that be an emergency vehicle alternative route? That is really dreaming. So you'd think maybe the fire marshal would weigh in on this, right? September 20th, I sent an email to Brian after this first report came out, and I said, where's the report from the fire marshal? I think those people normally weigh in on these. No response. So as far as I know, the fire marshal hasn't said that's a legitimate emergency replacement for North Maple Street. So I don't see how you have any choice but to deny this application, because that condition clearly isn't met. And that's not discretionary to say a 10-foot path is really an 18-foot road. That's too much imagination. Now, this comes into play because this is a single access subdivision. And North Maple Street and South Elm Street are the only two streets that are accepted from the 30-unit limit. In other words, if you have one access into a neighborhood, the number of homes cannot exceed 30 unless it's North Maple Street or I believe South Elm Street. With the addition of these 22 homes, we will be almost at 100 home sites, over 3 times the number of homes that are allowed on any single access street except South Elm Street. No place else in Canby can you have 100 homes on a single access street. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Questions? Okay.
And if you get a report from the fire marshal, I'd like to see it. Maybe that'll be the one more jock we get tonight.
Sarah Seal. If you could state your name and address, please.
My name is Sarah Seal, and I live at 3240 North Maple Street. My first comment to this commission is to point out how difficult it is as a citizen to make comments on a proposal when that proposal may dramatically alter from the time it is first presented to its final version in the city staff report. In both previous report publications on this application, the posting on the website was after the date advertised for public viewing, thereby reducing the time for the public to read, interpret, and reply in a timely manner. It reminds me of the old saying, putting the cart before the horse. In other words, we don't find out about stuff in enough time to be able to research and come up with responses, just like tonight, not knowing of the changes. I do want to express my appreciation to Mr. Sprague for his efforts to voluntarily improve our street. This is the whole issue. It's a very dangerous street, the way it is. Regardless of that, there are several reasons that I still object to the development. Historically, North Maple has seen a speed problem, with many drivers of all ages who see no problem of just racing down the road because it is long and straight, and seems to be especially long when the driver is trying to get someplace. Going north on North Maple Street is a downhill slope, and that adds to the speed of cars as they travel. And going south on North Maple Street to the nearest outlet, traffic is moving fast in the effort to get out of the neighborhood. There are no outlets until Northeast 23rd. As a dead-end road, does North Maple Street meet code in regards to outlets? I don't think so. The width variances on the street go all the way to Territorial Road. With the increased traffic from these 22 homes, from the proposed 56-unit apartment complex on Territorial, and plus the fact that Territorial Road is now being used as a bypass for downtown 99 going through downtown, because that's just really crazy. And so we have a lot more traffic. And the setup of the intersection is very difficult. I can foresee that there's going to have to be some kind of traffic control, a light or something that goes in there in the future. Another problem deals with the quality, integrity of our road is not the greatest. I mean, it's just laid down. It's not like a well-constructed division road might be. And I'm concerned about the integrity of the road as the big trucks, the construction equipment, and all the trucks that carry the heavy equipment. Over a period of perhaps several years, if this development is done in stages, that's going to break down the integrity of the road. It's going to be destructive. And so I'm asking the commission to make sure that the improvements to the road are done prior to the beginning of the building of the units, just for that reason, and for safety. Okay. I think that these conditions need to be met. Questions?
Thank you very much. Okay, now we have Vincent Anderson. If you could please state your name and address, please.
Vincent Anderson.
I thought that was what it was.
3370 North Maple. Most of the things that I wanted to talk about have already been covered. I am confused by this proposed widening up here. They proposed the widening, but they also said they want to make sure that they're not compelled to have to do it. Like they wouldn't have to stick to it. Now, I live right in that blue section there where they proposed before to not have parking on the east side of the road. My mother's 80 years old, uses a walker to get around. It pretty much means she couldn't come to my house anymore. So how can we be sure that they're actually going to do it? Is there going to be something in the approval that says, yes, you have to widen that street so we maintain parking? That's the main question that I have. It's kind of sad too that we don't find any of this stuff out until we actually get here at this meeting tonight to talk about things, and then new things are introduced that we're unaware of. So, okay, that's all I got. Is there any questions?
Thank you.
I hope you have questions about that too.
Lots of questions. We have Mr. Paul Tuller? Too late. Oh, okay. There you go. Call you for dinner.
My name's Paul Toole. My wife and I live at 3350 North Maple Street. First of all, I came prepared to talk about some specific things, and I find out when I get here, we now have received 3 conditions of approval for tonight. We knew nothing about it till we got here and it was announced. Why, Brian? First of all, I'd like to thank the Planning Committee for volunteering their time to assist the City of Canby in the development of process for our citizens. This is the first time I've sat before you here. I've sat before the Lake Oswego Planning Commission. I've sat before the West Lynn Planning Commission, and now I've lived in Canby for 14 years, and this is my first time before you. You guys are here all the time. I don't know how you do it. Thank you very much. My wife and I purchased our home at 3350 North Maple Street in June of 2004. We purchased our home for 3 main reasons. First, we enjoy the rural atmosphere. I grew up in Ohio where they have a sign that still says, "Keep horses off the sidewalk." The dead-end street we enjoy allows us to have a little piece of paradise. I respect Doug and his family's rights to try and develop that property. It's the American way. However, the development of 3500 North Maple Street by the Canby Development LLC into 22 new homes threatens our current lifestyle and culture. The dead-end street now becomes a greater hazard than it already is now. This is not a benefit to the public, which in Brian's proposal to you repeats several times, this is a benefit to the public. I don't perceive it as a benefit to the public. You've approved other developments in Canby with narrow streets that are a half street like ours. In front of my house, you can measure, it goes from the curb to 20 feet, and then they're growing rhubarb at Ed's farm. That's the width of my street. None of those other developments that you've approved with those narrow streets are dead ends. There's through streets. It's kind of funny, we all drive Redwood almost every day. There's no sidewalks on most of Redwood. If the garbage trucks are picking up, you either got to wait or you got to be very careful going around them. This is not a benefit to the public either, because I don't know how we can build a street 34 feet across, then put a white line on it, and tell people, well, this is where you walk now, this is where you ride your bike, this is where you go on your skateboard, things like that. The land on the west side of the street is zoned currently rural farmland, Class A, the best topsoil, the best farmland in the whole state of Oregon. I wish I owned it. It's a beautiful piece of property. My question for you is, how can A-graded farmland be rezoned for anybody to purchase a portion of it and not purchase all of it? How can right-of-way 20 or 30 feet wide be sold when it's A-graded farmland right now? Good question. Without a zone change. This is not a benefit to the public either. I like looking at Ed's rhubarb. This morning, somebody came down there and took 3 radishes right in front of your house, Ed. It wasn't me. Since we purchased our home in 2004, thousands of cubic yards of fill have been dumped into the 6.84 acres under question for development. Who monitored the quality and the quantity of that fill while it was being dumped there? I don't know. Is it actually safe to construct homes under this condition? Does the topsoil now need to be tested for a level 1 soil contamination? I don't know. I don't see this as a benefit to the public. I totally respect the applicant's right to develop the property at 3500 North Maple Street. It's the American way. At the same time, I do not accept the rationale as to how this benefits the citizens of Canby. I believe if you approve this development, it will have been done by exception. If you read through Brian's proposal, well, I'm not familiar with all the codes and all the rules and all the regulations, but I cannot see any other development in Canby in the last 10 years that have had this many exceptions put to it for development. One of our elderly senior citizens who came to many of our meetings, she repeatedly said, it's one way in, one way out. It's a dead end. And, well, again, I respect your decision and whatever you make, and we'll learn to live with it, but our little piece of paradise will be changed forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have M.E. Anderson. That would be you. And we have your name, so just state your name and address for the record, please.
Mary Anderson, 3370 North Maple Street. I live directly across from Monte Cuco's driveway, the very end home on Maple Street. I see at least 74 cars a day come up and down Maple Street, speed up and down Maple Street. I see bicycles. It is all on the Canby Hub down at on Territorial and Birch Street or Holly Street, that it is a running, walking park, dog walkers. If this is built, it will just be horrendous. The traffic now is unbelievable. I've counted as many as 81 cars on a Sunday. When those traffic programs were done where they drive across the street, this was done for maybe 2 days. It was in February and not April that they were done. Turned in April, not February, which is the lowest part. On the country club, the back of my house faces the country club, and when they have a tournament or whatever event that they have there, there has been as many as 28,000 rounds of golf in the summertime. Those cars go up and down Maple Street looking for a way to get out. So those cars too will be going in that cul-de-sac to get out. It is one way in and one way out. There is no provision for safety there. So I hope you take that to what it's really causing, because we have people that are blind on our street, we have people that are deaf on our street, we have people that work landscape, that bring big trucks and park on, and if there's no parking on the Monte Cuco side, which there actually really is because they park buses and kinds of equipment up and down there all the time, but that would be an exception too. Then regular people that just come to live on the street can't park there. But they can. So So I hope you take that into consideration, what the real traffic and the real impact of the neighborhood is going to be. Now let's talk about the Mola Fire Road. That is used now because of all the development on the other side of Territorial by hundreds of people, the disc park players. There's people that come to the Eco Park entrance there because they can't get to the Molalla Fire Road walk trail any other way. They park in front of the people's houses on 34th Street and block their drives of crime down there. Plus, the river is very unsafe on the Molalla Fire Road, right down by the cul-de-sac. It just drops off into the river, so that's pretty unsafe. And if you couldn't even get rescue down there, you'd have to come from some other part of the river to get to those people. So that, somebody ought to take a real good look at how real safe it is. I've seen several people that live on Maple Street actually pulled by the back of the neck onto their property so they didn't get hit by a FedEx truck. It is horrific traffic there. And it's just the way that people are not stating the truth about this is just flabbergasting to me. Now, the Molalla Trail, we have all kinds of kids. We fished out people out of the river going up and down there. I mean, it is a dangerous, it would have to be fenced. It is so dangerous in the summertime. Dogs, people, little kids on bicycles. We've had people come across that lot. I mean, on bicycles, drive across it in cars. Police drive across it in cars, chasing people onto the fire trail. I mean, you're going to add, I don't know how many people, how big those houses are going to be, but you're going to add a significant amount of traffic to that street. And so unless it is widened with sidewalks, I mean, the proposal of putting a white line down it and having people stay inside of there with their baby strollers, their bicycles, their dogs, and their runners, and their events that go up and down there is just not reasonable. That's all I have to say. So think about that.
Thank you very much. Elon Langridge. Hope I pronounced your name correctly. Just state your name and address, and then I'll get it right the next time.
Okay. My name's Elan Langridge, and I'm 1947 North Maple. And I'm not down where we're talking about. I'm up closer to Territorial. And when they did the traffic study, Mr. Mobley should have come to my house to do the traffic study. 20 years ago, I came and I actually testified concerning the same area for development. At that time, safety in our portion of the road was my concern with the added traffic it would generate. As our portion of Maple is narrowed and visibility at one point is very tricky. Since that time, the whole Centex development went in with 20th being opened up. 20th is used by residents of the Centex development, as is 21st and 22nd, all accessing Maple as the arterial road used for their trips. Additionally, we've had several more houses built on Maple, across from the country club. 2 more just were passed to put in just this last month by you for that same area. We still have the operating church school and a preschool on Maple, and a preschool on Country Club and Greenview Drive. Maple and 20th serve as a well-attended school bus stop as well. The improvement of the logging road and its use by walkers and runners increased our foot traffic considerably, as our street makes the perfect loop. So it's kind of neat because where we're at, everybody has the red faces and are about to collapse because they've done the whole loop. Our neighbor, Willamette Country Club, is now putting in a state-of-the-art fitness center. They are thinking this will increase the traffic by 200 plus vehicles a day. And one thing that's not being considered is the traffic that we get from the country club. You have 50 plus employees alone, 2 trips on the road, that's 100. That's 100 just by just the employees. That's not the members, that's not the special events. The quality of life is what was about to be jeopardized for us. And the Institute of Transportation Engineers in Washington, D.C., they have a kind of a grading of traffic. And they say that 300 cars on a stretch of neighborhood road is excellent. Good is 300 to 600, acceptable is 600 to 1,200, and poor is 1,200 plus. And in my judgment, and by just watching, we have at least 2,000 plus cars that use our road, and it might not be all the time because of the fact you have summer when all this, well, from about March until about now, the country club is very busy. When school starts, that doubles up things. So things are sporadic and, you know, it's maybe not all the time, but I know for a fact what we see where we are located. And even though we're not down far enough, everyone uses our road. They have stated that maybe Country Club would be an access road, or going down 23rd or 22nd to get out of that area. People don't do that. They use Maple Street. It's the easiest one. We have people coming from Country Club Drive that use Maple Street to go out. So when they did the traffic study, they really should have come down farther where we are located so they can get an actual idea of what type of traffic we have on our road. The one thing that's really interesting too is that when you think about Canby, you think of Canby as the garden spot. Isn't that what we are? The garden spot. And if you go to the Chamber of Commerce site, it says that Canby was a place where there's choice land, a place where there's fertile soil. Monacuco Farms is a wonderful place. It is one of our jewels, just like Swan Island Dahlias is. It's something that should be preserved. Willamette Country Club is a wonderful neighbor. It is also a very precious place in our city. It is a place that we need to honor, and we need to help do whatever we can for providing whatever they have, what type of goals that they have. And they've been good. They've been a good neighbor to all of us. You've noticed that no one has talked about them derogatorily. But I do want you to know that for me, I would really like to explain to you, and what I tried to explain is the traffic is really the one thing that we need to be looking at a little bit closer. And in doing so, I think that you would see that what Mr. Mobley was talking about, 500, no. And I would invite him to come and have coffee on my front porch sometime. And we'll just chew the fat, and I'll show him how many people go up and down our road. Anyway, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is it possible for the residents to recognize John Gunter? He was very active in this whole process, and he had knee surgery at the beginning of the week, or last week, and he's made a special effort just to come tonight. Could you recognize him to speak now?
Well, if no one has, well, he was the third one down, but I can move him up. I don't have a problem with him. Mr. John Gunter. Now, John, you're going to get all kinds of sympathy from me. I've had
planned this 6 weeks ago.
I've had 6 knee surgeries and 2 knee replacements, so I have sympathy for your knee situation. So fire away.
My name is John Gunter. I live at 930 Northeast 34th Place in Canby with my nurse and wife, Randy. I want to talk about 2 or 3 things tonight, if I could. There's been some comments about the 30 lot, 30 house is the maximum that you can have on a single access subdivision. And unfortunately, North Maple Street is exempted from that by code. However, the code for cul-de-sacs does not exempt North Maple, and it does not exempt any other street in the city of Canby. And currently, the distance from the cul-de-sac, which by definition is the end of the road, the allowable distance, according to code, city of Canby, is 400 feet. Currently, it's in excess of 3,300 feet to the nearest point of alternate access to Maple Street. That's a really big difference. And we would think that it's a situation that, we're not happy with the situation as it is now for emergency access. And if you put 22 more houses down there, that just exacerbates the problem. So I'd like you to think about that for a minute. Also, I'd like you to think about the drainage and the grading issues that are involved here. As previously stated, there has been several, I would say several thousand yards of material dumped on that site since approximately 1990. And I don't know for a fact that there has or has not been a fill permit issued for that. However, if there is, I've seen no reference to it in any of the city's documentation, which leads me to believe that most probably there isn't. And if in fact that much material was deposited on that property over the period of time, there should be some sort of record that would ensure that that material was done, that dumping was done properly. As the ground currently stands in its current condition, it slopes fairly uniformly from the northwest corner to the southeast corner. I would guess that the difference in fall from those two across that is probably somewhere in excess of 10 feet, which to me means that pretty much all the water that falls on that is going to run down and possibly come between. I live on the corner of the cul-de-sac and one of the low points there, and we've had water between our two houses down there on more than one occasion. Fortunately, I do not have to have a sump pump at this point in time. I'm not saying that that won't happen in the future, but 2 or 3 of my other neighbors that live on the same side of the street that I do have to have sump pumps. And that's all come to pass in the last 10 or 15 years since the surface water has been affected by the fill that's been placed on the property. I don't see any indication that there's been a soils report done as far as constructability for homes on that piece of property. If there is, I missed it in the report, and you have my apologies, but currently I have not seen one. Also, there's been some discussion is about timing of building of the street. I think I can shed a little light on that for you. The thought process there is that if the subdivision is approved, we would like to see a condition that no construction be allowed in the subdivision area itself until the street improvements are complete. That would at least give this existing street a fighting chance of surviving the construction process itself. The trucks in and out could go on the newer, stronger structural street section, which would have to be built to accommodate the new traffic flows. But the theory is that if you give the street a chance and take some of the traffic load off of the oldest part of it, that maybe the old part will live and to fight another day, and we won't have to have it repaired in a very untimely manner. The street itself was overlaid approximately 6 years ago, and that, as I know of, there was no additional structural integrity added by the overlay. They did not use any stress-absorbing membranes or petromat or anything like that. They just put a 2-inch overlay on it. And structurally, it doesn't give you very much. And also, I got a bone to pick with the fact that we don't get the information timely. I find that that's very inefficient, and in fact, I think it's almost insulting that somebody would say, oh, well, we have to do this last minute so that these people don't know what's going on. Thank you.
Mr. Scott Smith. Take good care of your knees. The rehab is important. Scott Smith.
Scott Smith, 2700 North Maple Court. I came here to Canby in 1974, bought 2 lots in 75 on the golf course. There was only 3 houses, and all the other ones down along Annex 2 and 3 were all vacant. It was a floodplain about where that blue line starts, and that was a 100-year floodplain. Now, I know they've changed it to at least a 500-year, but why they did not develop that other area down there was because it was a area where the water collected a lot. So I can't understand why they filled that in without, if they have a permit. What I would like to know is, do you have the permit number? And when was this issued? And for how long was this permit issued for this fill? I also feel that I agree with Phil Seal and Doug Poppin on all the exceptions that are going on. And when you do widen this road, if it ever happens, the farm equipment use Maple Court to turn around in. So all the mud from all their, especially their school buses where they have everybody go down, it just gets it all muddy. We've had trouble with some of the drainage down on our street where the city had to come back and put in some bigger drains. Now, right there on just about past the golf course entrance is where they pull into their fields, back out, and go around, and there's a catch basin right there that all it does is run mud when it rains, and it runs right down into the sewer line. Now, any other builder has to have some kind of protection for the sewers. They have to have covers for the sewers. Why is there not one there now? When it's always raining. It's always filling up, all the dirt. Where's that dirt's going to go? It's going to go down till it can't flow anymore, and it'll plug up the sewer. So I'm hoping that this process you'll deny this process, mainly for all the exceptions that have been going on. And I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Russ Langridge. There you are. You will state your name and address for the record.
Russ Langridge, 1947 North Maple Street, and I've got a little bit different testimony in light of the soils. I guess I'm here as more of an expert witness as a soil scientist, and I have in your packet, I have an official document stating my concern about traffic, and that you'll find in your packet. My sidekick, Yolande, she's already addressed that, so I don't have to do that. But I was, because of my experience as a soil scientist, I've had a couple landowners concerned about the wetness issue, and so they said, hey, can you look at it? Well, and I looked at it briefly. I mean, it's not like you can go out there and do much detail, but I said, yeah, I'll just look and see what the soil survey has to say. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen the soil survey, but if you haven't, you need to, because it's a public document for every county, and it's available to be used. So what I did is I just jotted down a few notes, and I actually made copies so you could have, it's hitting you cold turkey, but you can read over it after I read through it at a later time and maybe digest a little bit more what I'm going to say. But it specifically involves the this relationship of potential for wetness that might not have been there before. So here, I'm just going to read it and make it real quick and easy. My name is Russ Langridge. Although I'm a homeowner living at 1947 North Maple Street and concerned about the current street vehicle pedestrian safety issue, I am now providing comment as a soil scientist expert witness. I'll give just so I'm not blowing smoke and you guys will believe me, but I am an ARCPAC certified soil classifier, a retired soil correlator for the USDA Soil Survey Region 1, responsible for quality assurance and developing the soils information that you see. And I had a great job of being in charge of that over Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. So I know soil. It's something important to me. I was contacted by an adjacent homeowner that is adjacent to the area of the proposed development, and made aware that several homeowners that also located adjacent to the proposed development site had experienced a significant increase in wetness problems since the advent of landfilling on this parcel. Their question to me was, could this wetness problem be caused by the adjacent parcel modification? That's the question. Is it reasonable to think that or not? So I just looked at it from a scientific mind, whatever side of that brain that is. So from that standpoint, of course, I can't provide any hard data that I would say, oh, we did a flow rate test and it went this direction and it popped out here. So I don't have that. But, and so not having that, I can't say, yeah, it does or no, it doesn't. But I can use the information available to all of us, the soil survey, to tell us some things that, might give some credence, I think, to the possibility of wetness being maybe a causative factor. So these points I can respond, and I've got about 6 or 7 points, and I'll just read them. Number one, original mapping on the official soil survey map as found on the USDA Web Soil Survey, which is on the computer. You guys can all look at it sometime. It appears accurate. So when I look at that map, it appears accurate. That is, those lines, they kind of match the landscape breaks that were there on that original mapping of that aerial photograph. So, and the aerial photograph used in the Clackamas County survey was a number of years ago. So it was looking at the natural landscape. Soil mapping was consistent to the natural landscape boundaries in existence prior to filling activities. Number two, original soil maps show a typical high floodplain, what I call a barren channel topography, with the soils identified that would be expected. So in the same kind of a landscape position along the Willamette, whether it be Clackamas County or Marion County or Yamhill County, you could expect the same kind of soils to be showing in that level. So it looked good. Quality assurance wise, it looked reasonable. So soils on the convex bar position, so the upper convex areas, they were called Canterley and Cloquato. Now these are nice, well-drained, prime farmland soils. And the soils on the concave channel positions are identified as the Wapato soils, and these are poorly drained, that is high water tables, surface to 6 inches, subject to ponding and some degree of flooding, even to this date. I think it's different than what it was, but it still has a flooding hazard. In addition, these soils were also classified as hydric. It's kind of a critical thing. That is, they're a wet soil, and if they had the right kind of plants, what they call hydrophytic plants, you get...
Excuse me, Russ. We had some time on, but you're kind of the only guy that's kind of gone over it. So if you could take a few minutes to wrap it up.
All right, we'll wrap her up, and you guys can read the rest of the points. The gist is, and sorry to went over, man, that was quick. The soils look reasonable. The filling that occurred, it's very reasonable to think that the flow of water in that system has changed. And so I think what these folks are concerned about is could very well be a result of that. And, you know, a recommendation I think would be very important is to make sure, whatever happens, that these folks are brought into the equation, and maybe talk to them a little bit more detail to say, well, when did this start? Could it be? And in the engineering design and what goes on, kind of critical that that's taken care of now and if something happens. So pretty important. The soils are telling you something. Sorry I took longer.
That's okay. Thank you. Anthony Polito? You related to the Montecrucos?
My name's Tony Polito. We live at 775 Northeast 31st Place here in Canby. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach here. I agree with everything that my neighbors have said. I also agree with Mr. Poole that the applicant has a right to want to develop property. I think if any of us had property, we'd want to do that. How do you do it in a way that benefits the neighborhood? I think that's the question. And the question from my standpoint, I'm a real estate broker. Is it going to benefit the neighborhood? I can tell you unequivocally, putting 22 homes down there is going to decrease the property value for everyone on that street. It's going to be a mess. Currently, right now, the traffic is terrible. There's a reason that people buy there. We've been there since 1994. We bought there because of the golf course, because it was quiet, because of the quality of life. We're lucky in Canby. We have a quality of life in that area that people just envy. We don't want it to be Wilsonville. And it's very easy to assume that if they do something like this, it could turn into Wilsonville. It's the first step. I heard there was a comment made earlier that substandard roads in Canby have been approved in the past. Does that mean that we had to take that same mistake and do it again in the future? I don't think so. It's about quality of life. It's about safety. There are a tremendous amount of cars that'll be on that road. It's very, in my business, I sell new construction, I sell residential resale. It's not 2 cars per home, it's 3 and 4. That's going to be about 80 plus cars going up and down. Different times of the day, different times at night, that won't be safe. The proposal to widen the road, to me, is nothing more than a Band-Aid. It's a bike path. I believe that you received a letter that I wrote with pictures. Look at those pictures, please. It's very important. We can talk all we want about this theoretically. Unless you've seen the road, unless you've driven the road, you really don't get a feel for it. I mean, this is reality. How are people going to exist there? It's only going to take one accident, somebody getting hurt or worse, what's going to happen? Then there's going to be requirements, and people are going to be hurt financially. No one wants that to happen. Something that I think is maybe a solution to the problem, and I brought it up at one of the neighborhood meetings, and it would take some time, it would take some effort and a little bit of money by the applicant, but he'd benefit, and I can help in it, and I volunteer to help, is to get the zoning changed. We don't need 22 homes. You could build 7 homes. We could market those, I know as a real estate broker in high ends, we could market those as the Canby Street of affordable dreams. See, and it would work. CC&Rs, one level homes, not to exceed $800,000. Sell them with country club memberships. Be beautifully landscaped. It would work. It would minimize the traffic, and it would increase the value and not decrease the quality of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have Mr. Tim Nichols. Nope, it says Tim right here at 2135 North Country Club Drive. Okay. Mr. Scott Taylor. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Evening, my name is Scott Taylor, 2307 North Maple, Canby, Oregon. First of all, I wanted to thank you very much for your time and donation to the city. As you may or may not know, I spent about 10 years as a city councilor and 8 years as the mayor, and then 6 more years in utility board. So I have some idea what giving up your evenings and working through all this and trying to understand all the technicality. I also was the mayor during a variety of controversial talks about growth, no growth, and how that all works. So I appreciate your willingness to spend the time and tell all the detail. For me, we started tonight. This process is fascinating in that I got here and then found out the rules have changed and the information has changed. And so I would say that I came primarily, you have a letter from me earlier about the width of the street. And I'm fascinated. I live up at 23rd, and I had to widen the street, put in a sidewalk, and make it a legal street before I could build my house there. Now just maybe 50 feet down is the front door to the country club coming out, and also the road narrows. Now, we as a city made many bad decisions. And some of the bad decisions we made had to do with putting in sidewalks or not putting in sidewalks. And during my time on the council, we wrestled and wrestled with that, and then we got pretty aggressive about it. And I noticed you and the council and everything else I look at have now addressed that issue and tried to make it a safe area. I can even drive out of town where we now have speed bumps and curving. So the question would be, we used to talk about when that area became into the city, when it became part of the city, because I have a neighbor who doesn't actually live in the city. We run a different power line to them because they're technically in the county and they're on that side of the road. So we're going to go ahead here. I'm very happy that I'm one of the people that walks every night. My neighbors can tell what time of night it is. And so I'm very glad you've widened the road, that they offer to widen it. I still don't think it addresses the concept of when that comes into the city, we will build a normal size road. That road, as you've heard, is not up to standard. And we continue to figure out how to dodge the conversation about a safe street with sidewalks. And I would like to see us live up to that concept of it's time to move away from what we might have approved 30 or 40 years ago. The idea that the community benefits from this, I seem to be now paying a variety of additional fees because the tax base, as I remember, now you guys can update me, I've been away for a while, but the tax base didn't used to pay for all the costs. We were just about breaking even on the new houses. Now I'm paying additional fees because we can't expand the tax base with all the compression and the other things that go on. So I'm not sure how the public benefits by this move. And so I question that. And then I guess because you're running out of time and there's lots of folks back there, you can read what I had to write, but I am amazed with the lack of our ability in this process to show up here and hear about additional information that was submitted, and I have no opportunity to look at it or comment on it, and then you'll make a vote, and that's when I get to know what was in the package and what was going on. And I do not know how that is a participatory process that you look forward to. So thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Larry Vargas. You could state your name and address for the record, please.
Larry Vargas, 2005 North Lupine Street. And I've listened to everybody's comments and things here, and so I'll keep mine short because they echoed a lot of the same sentiment I have. While I do sympathize with the people that are trying to develop the property, I'm more concerned about having responsible growth. I've moved from different areas where growth wasn't responsibly handled, and you ended up with farms that used to be there are gone. I've lived up on Bull Mountain Road on the off of the west side of Bull Mountain, and if those of you that have gone up Roy Rogers, you can see how things have just gone tremendously wrong, and the traffic conditions are really bad. So my concern here, you're talking about the traffic conditions on Maple Road, but nobody's addressed what happens where Maple Road funnels in. All that traffic has to go elsewhere, and I don't believe we've done enough in the infrastructure to support this, the extra building and traffic that's going on. There's additional housing that's being built on territorial close to Pine that's coming. So all of this is going to be funneling in onto territorial roads. So it's not just Maple that's going to have a traffic issue, it's going to impact the whole surrounding area. And I think that needs to be taken into account. And one other thing I wanted to say is just the fact that we're fortunate enough to live close to an organic farm. And I think it's very important that we keep that sacred. I mean, you don't want to have any cross-contamination. Things are grown organically for a reason, and they can be cross-contaminated. And I think having too many homes has the potential of possibly infecting the organic produce that's grown there. I was very pleased to hear the idea that somebody else had spoken to about limiting the number of homes there. If we're going to develop it, fine, but I think it has to be limited in the number of houses to control traffic and also preserve the area as a whole, because the draw of Canby, the beauty of Canby, is its rural bucolic nature, and I think that's a plus for the city, and we need to try and do our best to preserve that and do responsible, sustainable growth.
Thank you. Okay, we have Mr. Michael McNichols. He is going to be speaking for himself. John Johns, Jones, Janice Jones, Mike Brown, and Lynn Brown. So you have a total of 25 minutes.
Thank you. 25 minutes to bore you gentlemen. I think I can do it in 6.
You will have our eternal gratitude.
And Laney, if I go over 7, please stop me. My name is Michael McNichols. My wife and I have lived at 730 Northeast 30th Place for 27 years. And this is an interesting evening. A lot of the speakers that have addressed you all have basically summarized everything I have to say for the most part. I am going to talk about a few issues. But again, I want to reiterate my frustration. I mean, I'm the guy who's guilty of writing a 10-page letter with 40, 50 pages of exhibits. In my defense, most of those are photographs. But I drafted it with the idea that certain, issues were in play. And we come here tonight, and Brian Brown mentioned there's some stuff, the sewer plan that came in on the 10th. There's some new information he hasn't reviewed yet. There's additional traffic study or something, an update that was made. None of us have reviewed it. And my question is, when a developer comes in, are there application deadlines that are enforced, or is it open-ended until you all vote? I mean, it's one of those where I feel like this whole process has been prejudiced against the individual citizens that live and reside on North Maple. And it's been a very frustrating situation. The second thing, I wrote my letter, and it mainly concerns a lot of the safety issues, a lot of the fairness of the imposing the cost of the sidewalk. Again, coming in here, there were several plans in play. One of them was the citizens pay for the sidewalk on the east side, which I felt was a grossly unfair allocation or subsidy of the project. Now we learn, I mean, and then at one of the meetings, there was a meeting in December, a meeting in January, and it was mentioned that, well, no, maybe there'll be a walkway in play, but it's not finalized yet. I'm not sure it's finalized now because we get some more information tonight about with variation, and that's a concern. Somebody else said, what's going to be finalized before this project, is approved or denied? I mean, that is a major consideration. It's just a consideration of fairness for the people that are here with concerns tonight. But along those lines, I was looking at the materials, and I'd basically read the traffic studies. I'd read the findings of the staff report, and this afternoon I just kind of looked at the application itself. And I was reviewing it, and I was reviewing the statutes, and it mentions ORS 195, 195, 303, 307, and in that application it states that a lot of the standards are non-discretionary. Now, I've been, a resident in Canby 27 years. I've been practicing law for almost 25 years. I don't do land use law, so I don't plan I don't speak as an expert, it's just one of those, I read those, and a lot of those were applicable to needed properties, needed being defined as low income, middle income, fixed income, or whatever. And I would invite you all, some of the laws are complex, tax law, securities law, whatever, some of it's straightforward. You can get on Google and just Google these and see if the laws are really applicable, if you are allowed or if you're not allowed to use discretion. And the other issue is safety. I mean, how do you quantify safety? That's kind of a gut feeling. And sidewalk aside, I mean, we're talking about this pedestrian path, and I don't know if it's 4 feet, 6 feet. I haven't heard anything that says otherwise, that it's separated from the vehicle traffic by a painted white stripe. I don't know if it's 4 inches, 6 inches, or 8 inches. But there was a meeting on September 19th at the Willamette Valley Country Club, and between 55 and 60 people were in attendance, and Brian Brown was there as well to answer questions. It was mainly a question and answer session. And I asked him if there was any place in the city of Canby where pedestrian walkway was separated from vehicle traffic by a painted stripe. And correct me if I'm wrong, please, but you couldn't come up with one area in the city of Canby where that, traffic control device was in play. So I think there's a reason for it. It kind of, I was dumbfounded when I read, well, hey, we're going to have vehicular traffic. We're going to have pedestrian traffic. And by the way, pedestrians have to share it with the bicyclists as well. And they're only separated from vehicle traffic by a painted line. And the rebuttal of that is, well, that's how it's been for the past 30 years. But that's how it was prior to this development, prior to the increase in vehicle traffic. And I just think it's asking too much. It's a really big liability for somebody. And it's needless, and it exposes the pedestrians that use it to a lot of risk. Now, if you look at my materials, I mean, the latest traffic study was done, was it September 18th or something like 2016? Not the one that was tonight, but there's one in 2015, one in 2016. That one was talking about pedestrian use, and it mentioned kind of like non-material or wasn't going to increase significantly. But if you look at the materials I included, Canby actively promotes in one of its brochures utilizing the logging trail and coming back on North Maple as a walking loop. Then there are several fun ones a year. I mean, since this thing took off, I've only noticed one in the paper that I was able to pull out, but there are several 5K runs. I think on 4th of July, there's quite a few or whatever. So it's not like that isn't used for just pedestrian purpose. Thank you very much, 7 minutes. So, in closing, and again, I thank you. Okay, the emergency vehicle access, this is one of those where, if you're all familiar with the logging road, use a common sense test. Does it really make sense to have that as a emergency response route when there is an emergency, lives on the line? Beyond that, hey, thank you guys. It's a thankless job you're doing, and I appreciate your courtesies.
Thank you.
Any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, is there anybody here that is neutral on the matter? Although I can't imagine that. I've had some pro, a lot of con, so this is the opportunity if you just want to say your piece, either way, now's that. Now we'll have 10 minutes of rebuttal.
Would you grant a 5-minute recess so we can talk? We've heard almost an hour and a half worth of testimony.
No. I actually think that's reasonable in case people want to go to the bathroom. So we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene at 9:35. You what?
We're going to ask you to record the moment.
You can state your name and address.
Well, Chair Saber, I'm going to let Doug go, and then I'll talk, and then Todd Mobley may have something to say.
Okay. It's still 10 minutes.
Understood.
Okay.
So Doug Sprague, the applicant, do have a fill permit, first one in 1990, and then another one later. It has been continually filled over the last 27 years to improve the property. Been working on this property for 27 years to address the concerns, drainage concerns. I've installed drains on the property over the years, some of them after the 96 floods. The drainage system in place will handle this. It's this proposal is a good proposal, and to miss out on the widening of Maple Street would be, if the conditions exist to the extent and the way that you've heard that they do tonight, this improves that. These are terribly needed. Everything that we're doing improves the current situation.
Thanks, Doug. Chair Savory, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Mike Robinson, again on behalf of the applicant. So first of all, we had indicated we might ask for final written argument or leaving the written record open, which is a right under state law. But we're not going to do that. We want to do our rebuttal, and we think you ought to vote on the application tonight. So let me talk about what we've heard tonight. First of all, as I said at the beginning of the hearing, the test is if we've met the approval standard. And I recognize that people do not want this property to be developed. They can couch it in any way they want, but they like it being vacant. But the reality is, if we meet the approval criteria, the Planning Commission must approve it. Now, that's not something I like saying, but that's the way the law operates. It's not the will of the room. It's not how much people enjoy vacant property. It's about whether we meet the approval criteria and whether the evidence demonstrates we do that. And based on the record before you, both of those things are present. We meet the approval criteria, and we do so by substantial evidence in the record. Virtually none of the testimony you heard tonight cited a single approval criterion. Things like whether the soil is wet or whether a fill permit has been obtained, and Doug says that it has, are not relevant approval criteria. So let's talk about some of the things that we did hear about tonight. Traffic. There are two things that the city's traffic consultant said, not the applicants, but the city's traffic consultant said, that are important, and let me find them. The first study by the city's traffic consultant, DKS, was done on April 8th, 2015. Page 2 of the study noted the number of trips that would be generated by this subdivision, and it says, quote, "This increase in vehicle trips will not significantly impact traffic operations along the surrounding transportation network and will not trigger the need for evaluation of off-site impacts at surrounding intersections based on operational standards." So we have the city's traffic study. There's no other traffic study in the record except the applicants saying that the number of trips from a 22-lot subdivision will not affect how that street operates. We also have the city's traffic study dated November 17, 2016, which recommended a 4-foot asphalt shoulder separated by the stripe on the west side. So the applicant is only proposing what the city's traffic consultant said. We didn't come up with it. The city's traffic consultant came up with it. Both of these documents have been in the record, the first almost 2 years, the second almost a year, and we don't have a competing traffic study. So the only evidence you have as to traffic safety are the 3 studies, 2 of them the city's, saying that traffic will be adequate. The second thing you heard was, quote, "all the exceptions," end quote. There's one exception requested in the application. It's expressly allowed by the R1 zone, and that's to have larger lots. And this applicant asked not for more density. In fact, they're doing fewer lots than that R1 zone allows, not for smaller lots, but to allow 2 bigger lots. That's the only exception. The criteria are met. The staff report went through it and explained why the criteria are met. The minimum width for the cul-de-sac lots, it's not an exception. It simply says you have a 60-foot standard, except that the Planning Commission may approve lots having less frontage, subject to special conditions to assure adequate access. And as the staff report explained, where you have lots on a cul-de-sac, it's not possible to have 60 foot of width, and the conditions of approval require an adequate driveway to each of those lots. So only one exception, only for 2 larger lots, not the number of exceptions that folks seem to think are being requested. And finally, this is properly zoned property. This is the second time Doug has been in front of the city to develop this property. It is appropriate to develop it. The fact that folks don't want to see it developed, we appreciate what they have to say, but it's the criteria that guide the decision on this, not the fact that people don't want to see the property developed. So we ask that you approve this with the conditions of approval recommended by your staff. It is the legal thing to do. Todd?
The record, it's Todd Mobley with Lancaster Engineering. I'll be brief. Mike covered parts of my rebuttal. I just wanted to point out in the record, we have hard data on traffic volumes and speeds on this subject, this piece of the street that were done in different months of the year, almost 2 years apart by 2 different engineering firms, and they both say the same thing. The traffic volumes are within the range of acceptable for the type of facility that's proposed. Average travel speeds on the northern segment are around 20 miles per hour, so we have hard data in the record. Again, it's engineering evidence in the record. The speeds on the street are, and we don't have anything contrary to that. We entered tonight the evidence on national design standards that support a pedestrian path that both engineering firms have agreed to and made recommendation to the city. So I'll leave it at that.
That's all we have. We thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll now have questions if that have arisen. I know that there's probably 1 or 2.
I have a question for Brian. The county part of the street, did they meet all the requirements for them?
One of the 3 additional suggested conditions of approval simply were overlooked by staff in trying to put together the report in a short time period, and it has to do with the county's letter that was submitted to the record, requiring them, approving them to widen the road as they were proposing up till October 12th to 34 feet, and indicating tonight that that's an option they would still entertain. They were introducing another option to 28 foot and a separate bike path, which I believe is an even better solution than the 34-foot wide street. So we fully support that as well. But the county's condition in their letter was that it will be built to their, I forget, they cited in their letter the street improvement standard that it must be built to, the widening part. And they approved that the stripe that was proposed was okay with them. And they saw that as an improvement to handle the existing traffic that Maple has and has had over the past 40 years as a temporary improvement, as what our DKS has been saying is a temporary situation until the adjacent property develops, because that's when the other half of streets get built, and has always been the case and is standard practice across the region.
Andre, any
Got a question? Some of the concerns brought up tonight were in regards to the emergency access road using the logging trail. It looks like the meeting minutes, the neighborhood meeting, concern number 6 kind of talks about that, and I believe the applicant's response for neighborhood concern number 6 was in regards to the emergency access, and I was going to ask Brian what the requirements are, if you are aware of the width for an emergency access road, and whether or not the Malala logging trail meets that requirement or not.
Yeah, there's some discussion about, and I do not know, I have not done the measurements, whether it's actually 10 or 12 feet wide, the paved path for the logging road trail. Generally speaking, we've heard from the fire department through time that 12 foot of paved surface is what they desire as a minimum. They talk about the 20 foot free and clear space. to help them if they ever need to stop at a location, put down stabilizers, because they usually go out to the side and that kind of thing. But actually a paved surface, if you think about fire responses anywhere and think of the city of Portland, and a third of their streets don't have even 12 feet for them to respond to fires. And so they can actually get down a narrower pathway than that. But the issue here is that we were told verbally, I was told by phone, I believe the applicant had visited directly with the fire department, and they had indicated that they were satisfied that the logging road would provide a means of emergency access. If there's a need to change the barrier posts and widen them in order to assure that they can get through those, that's an easy fix that I'm sure the applicant can take care of. But so we've been operating since the pre-application meeting with an understanding that the fire marshal was accepting of that for the rare and hopefully never needed emergency situation. And so it's not like it's going to be used in any frequent manner. Hopefully it may never be used.
That answer your question, Andre?
Yes. Thank you, Brian.
Tyler?
I think that pretty much took care of mine, too.
That was mine, too. Is that something that we can put in from a condition, that we get that in writing? Because it seems like it's verbal
We
at this
can
point.
certainly attempt to do that. I think I may have an email that alludes to that, but it was, at this point, I may be able to find that email. It wasn't a letter.
I know in the past, the ones that I've been a part of that we've approved have been very small. As far as the logging trail road goes, there's not a lot of, it hasn't been these longer stints of the logging trail. It's been something that's temporary access, and it's been very short, a few hundred feet.
There was probably 2008 or 9, there were 2 additional lots added to, adjacent to the logging road trail that are part of the Willamette Valley Country Club. That was a partition rather than a subdivision, and they indicated with that one that the logging road was serving as, continuing to serve as an emergency access to the existing homes that are out there and to those 2 new homes that were added as part of that partition. So there's precedent for using that argument from the fire department from that application as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Searle?
I'd like to know if there was any infringement from the river in the flood of '96, if anybody has any input on that.
I only have input from all of these folks and others over time that have indicated that there were no actual flood waters in '96. It was '66 when water was actually flowing through this property. 64. Or 64.
Christmas era of '64, as I remember, 'cause I went downtown and looked at Portland where they put the plywood up on the seawall. Okay, thank you very much.
One more, John. I didn't see anywhere in the conditions about a fence.
No.
We forgot to ask them about it.
Yeah, there is nothing in there currently that is requiring a fence that I'm aware of. And I'm only aware of some discussion by the applicant that was considering that he might put one up along the logging road trail to help protect those property owners from people just coming off the trail into the rear yards. So it might be something you want to consider.
I think Montecouco had indicated that they would like a fence on their property to keep people from doing whatever. I did have one, I need some clarification on what was the option. Was it a 24 or 28 foot?
The option they proposed tonight, it was a change to condition number 9. And I've wrote that down here, but basically they were saying they would prefer that we still allow the option of widening that section from just north of 23rd Avenue down to the south end of the Monacucco's property, which is the longest section. It's the red section on that up here, the red section, that they allow their proposed 28-foot widening of the current 24 to 25-foot pavement that's there today to 28, and then a separate 5-foot asphalt pavement, probably about 6 feet or so away from the edge of that pavement. And what that does, again, is preserves the on-street parking. It provides 2 complete travel lanes, and those travel lanes are not using the striped pedestrian pathway during an emergency. And so that's the benefit of this plan over just widening to 34 feet, because there's still that potential that during an emergency, they might cross the striped 8-inch white line if they need to, for whatever reason, because of extra vehicles being parked on one side or the other and that kind of thing. But at 34 feet wide, you have enough width that you have east side on-street parking, you have two-way traffic, and you have the pedestrian. You have enough space for all of those components because it's a city standard street width. The only difference is, instead of parking on the west side, you have the pathway. That goes away in the future. When development occurs on the west side, you change that pathway into on-street parking, and you put a permanent raised sidewalk outside of the street bed.
There is a separation, though, from the street and that path, at least it looks like on there.
Yes.
On the 28-foot wide version, not on the 34.
Right.
And there's a legal right for them to do that with the 50-foot roadway easement that exists in the full distance where the red is showing today and has always been there. There was just early questions about exactly if all of the lots had that on it, and that's been cleared up now. So it's clear that there is 50 foot of right-of-way, the full distance.
So our original conditions then, as written, would give them the option to do that?
No, we'd have to change it to include, they would like you to change it to include their proposed 28-foot and a separate asphalt path. And I would encourage you to go ahead and do that, because I would like to see them do that over just the widening to 34 feet. But either one's acceptable and meets the code standards.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Okay.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
There was a question for Brian. Does the city have any kind of policy or standard for accepting last-minute information from the applicant? And when is the cutoff time?
No, we really don't. We always advertise and tell people, the citizens that we send notice to, that there's a cutoff point if you want to get it into the packet so it can be distributed a week to 10 days in advance, so you have time to study all the information, but you can provide written testimony or your own oral testimony up until the time of the meeting. It's just, if you submit something that's voluminous at that time, it's not likely the Planning Commission's going to have time to review it, let alone staff having time. That's why we often say in our staff report, we make a recommendation absence the input from the public hearing, because there is that possibility that new information is going to show up at a public hearing. It's not ideal. I totally sympathize, and it's not good for staff. We can't deal with it as well, but in most situations, it just depends on which side you're on in the argument. The applicant in this case was supplying another option that they thought was better for the surrounding area, and that's how I've certainly taken it now that I've had a chance to think about it since they submitted that tonight.
Thank you, Brian.
You have anything else, Larry?
No.
One more question. Brian, is there any stipulation of when they have to build the road compared to, I mean, I know they want to do the development in phases.
We've recommended in the conditions that they make constructing the street improvements, whether it's the 28-foot and the 5-foot asphalt or the 34-foot the whole way, when they start their phase one of their subdivision, which has been proposed to be 3 lots, I believe. And so, in effect, they're building it before they're doing anything, you know? And so the request tonight has been a little bit more strict in that build all the improvements to North Maple first, then you can start building your phase one development. I don't see much difference in that request.
So with that, is that in that recommendation that they build it with phase one?
Right now, it's to build it along with phase one.
Okay.
I've got another question, forgive me.
Are we? No?
It looks like the applicant's proposing to have a 10-foot right-of-way easement as opposed to 10-foot right-of-way dedication.
I think that's just nomenclature. I don't think it makes any difference. It depends on how that right-of-way will eventually come to be. We've made, the way the conditions are set up now, it makes that necessary. They've indicated that it's not a problem. They're not worried about it. They're going to get that easement or dedicated right-of-way. I'm not sure what format it comes, but it will give the right for a road to be constructed on that property. And that's what the Montecoucos are intending to happen. And so whatever document they give us the right-of-way, it's going to allow a road to be built on it. There was a question by the audience that can you build that on, because it's outside the city right now. And so we've got a condition of approval that says they need to annex that dedicated road right-of-way so that it becomes R1 zoning, which is what the existing road is. So then they can build the road on it at that time by annexing it, because it will then have the R1 zoning. And so I think that's a necessary step to make sure that's clear, that somebody doesn't argue you're not supposed to build roads in, I forget what it is, EFU property. I think that's what it's on. Can't remember now.
Thank you, Brian.
Any other questions from Brian? Okay. My thoughts. Mr. Robinson, right? Okay. Is absolutely correct. Our job here is to apply the law and the regulations. I can sympathize all we want, and I think that there are a lot of legitimate arguments about this development. The main one for me is that a lot of it came at the very last minute. We didn't get a lot of this material until we sat down here. But fortunately, in my estimation, you guys filled in a lot of the blanks for me. I didn't get this 62-page document from Mr. McNichols until today, so it kind of worked both ways on that. But we're here to apply the law and the regulations as best we can. So my feeling is that we should, I will be voting to approve for the permit there, and with changing the condition number 9 to a 28-foot width with a bike path or a 5-foot path. I would like to see as an additional condition that the sidewalks will be built at the proponent's expense, and that there be no decrease in the parking, and that a fence is required, particularly along the Montecuco, I think, which is the east side, is that correct?
West side, west
okay,
side.
on the west side. So that would be my feeling on it.
I'm in lockstep with you on that one, all those conditions.
I don't think they were gonna build sidewalks on the east side, though. They were gonna leave it just curb tight. Right?
Correct.
Just on the west.
Oh, just on the west side.
The
I'm sorry.
paved, 5-foot pedestrian path on
Pathway,
the
that's
west
correct.
side.
So, I will entertain a motion to approve with the change to condition number 9.
Can I make a statement real quick?
Absolutely.
I just, I think it would be, we shouldn't leave tonight without saying good job to all of you who have been here to defend your neighborhood and your beliefs and all of that. As John said, Chair Savory said, our job is to follow the law as much as we may want to vote based on our opinion. And I know a lot of these guys on here probably side with you on opinions, but I just wanted to make sure that you heard us say that we're proud of you guys for standing up and coming here and saying your piece, so both for and against. So I just want to make sure that you guys knew that we appreciate you guys and that we have heard you. The way we vote may not necessarily appear that way, but I want you guys to know that you have been heard tonight.
I'll entertain a motion to approve. Oh, Larry, okay.
I want to say something too, because as far as subdivisions go, this is one of the nicest layouts I've seen since I've been on this planning commission. And I like the big lots. I think it's going to be really nice. That's all I have to say. Yeah, I make a motion that we approve subdivision 17-05, the 7 acres Sprague division with the condition number 9, change the 28-foot street with a 5-foot pedestrian path, and a condition added that they put a fence around the logging road and by Montecuco Farms.
Can I ask for quick clarification? So on the change to condition number 9, are you changing it to indicate that you want the 28-foot and not to give them the option?
Give them the,
Okay.
is that what you want?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We clear on what we want? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much for participating.
Yeah, that's still got to go through the system city. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron, oh, yeah. Okay, good to see you.
This is just a recommendation.
Coming out.
It's still got to go through the city council.
Yeah.
Ours closed. That's okay. I'm in the tail end, second. I got a really nice bottle.
No, I did not.
I did not.
People that buy property, people that bought property that was developed here probably, at some point that their house or their lot was opposed to people that buy this subdivision will, those other developments want to occur along this.
Oh, we gotta go. Yeah.
decisions. I can't remember all that, what it said on there.
What he has indicated, though, whether it's the edge of the street or now the edge of the sidewalk, if they do that, that
It's gonna be such a late night tonight. I'm gonna be so dead in the morning.
the level going out into the farm field, or it's gonna be a slope going up at
6:30 in the morning
no
at high
steeper than a 2-to-1
Still
slope.
probably got an hour
Or
before
down
when
from
I
a
get
2-to-1
home.
slope. And that's what you would be
Usually
probably
in
wanting
bed
to
by
look at, is that.
Me too, that's my problem. And like I said, I still probably got an hour's worth of work at home and eat something. We have
Yeah, at your next meeting, the way it works is that we have to have written findings of your
Hey,
decision.
Brian.
And we don't send out the decision until we have the written approval of those written findings. So at your next meeting, we'll try to have those available so that you can approve. And then that's when somebody can have the opportunity to appeal within 10 days, starting after we mailed that decision out.
Yeah, you've got on the agenda.
Yeah, I think
the
we have to
Allen
approve
manual.
last meeting's.
Yeah, so now on the agenda, you do have one for
That's-
approving the last one that
Yes.
you denied.
The North Redwood Landing?
Yeah, no, the
No, the
Ivy
Ivy
Park.
Park subdivision.
Ivy Park subdivision,
From the last meeting.
Oh,
the 12 Ivy Park subdivision, and conditional use, and
No, we didn't approve it.
We did not, we denied it.
you guys denied that.
All those.
So the rezoning of that one went on to the council, and was that the 18th? So it was on the October 18th agenda, but before the meeting was held, the applicant requested that it be postponed because he wanted the denial of the conditional use and the subdivision to catch up with the rezoning because he's planning to appeal. And he can't appeal until you approve the written findings tonight, at which time he's indicated to the city council he plans to appeal. That way, they can act on all three and not just on the rezoning.
So we're approving the denial tonight, is that?
Right.
We're approving the final written decision.
Yes. If you have not read the written decision, there's only one important part. It's all the same thing, except reasons that you provided. I took a little bit of leeway, but generally, I think I captured your basic reasons for denial, and I put it in those written findings.
They were okay.
Same here.
so we need to
Approve the final written
approve the
decision.
final decision for ZC 17-02, CUP 1705, SUB 1704, South Ivy Park subdivision, Allen Manual, and the denial thereof.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve the final decision of ZC 17-02/CUP 17-05/SUB 17-04 South Ivy Park subdivision, Allen Manuel, and the
Favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Items of interest, Brian, other than going home and going to bed.
Yeah, so that talks about, we have this 89 at the next meeting. Yeah.
Hopefully there won't be one person for every house that's being built.
Just keep ratcheting up the traffic. Okay. Anything else?
Nope.
Items of interest from us. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Yes. There you are.